All right, we're back at it today, talking more about the hemispheric reactions to the events in Europe and Asia. Today, focused on American neutrality in the 1930s. And our discussion today is going to start with the NYE Committee. The NYE Committee was led by the senator. It was a Senate committee established in 1934, led by a senator in the United States named Gerald Nye. And this was an investigatory committee to look into why the United States entered into the First World War. And when the NYE Committee issued its report, its findings, it reported out that the United States reasoning for entering the war went beyond the unrestricted submarine warfare and the concerns over the Zimmerman Note, but focused on financial factors. For example, far greater loans from American banks and businesses were being made to the UK than to Germany, giving the United States an interest in the United Kingdom not losing this war. American corporations made massive profits during the war years, and this is the American economy, and making sure those loans got paid back brought the United States ultimately into the First World War. Now, this report is gonna give huge support to the non-interventionist movement in the United States, and as we're gonna start to see tensions escalate both in Asia and in Europe, the NYE Committee report is going to be a contributing factor to the United States staying a neutral nation through the duration of the 1930s. With regard to these neutrality acts that are going to be passed, there's a series of them, and we're going to focus on the first four at the outset here. And what I want you to focus on with these neutrality acts, because remembering the minutia of each individual neutrality act can be challenging, what I want you to focus on is that they're going to go in an ever-escalating way to keeping the United States more out of these European or Asian conflicts. So starting with that first toe in the water of American neutrality is the 1935 Neutrality Act, the first Neutrality Act. This gave the President of the United States, at this point, Roosevelt, the power to prohibit U.S. ships from carrying American-made munitions to nations at war. So note what we have here. It's the easiest step of neutrality. It's just you don't let American ships carry weapons. Anything else, fine, but no weapons can be carried to nations at war. And then it's also going to prohibit citizens from traveling on belligerent nations' ships. Or I should say it's going to make citizens traveling on belligerent nation ships at their own risk. So if you want to get on the 1939 version of the Lusitania, which was a British ship back in 1915, you're on your own. The United States is not going to be held responsible for avenging the loss of you. This was on your own. It was meant to discourage Americans from getting on these ships. The next year, a second Neutrality Act is passed, and we're going to move a little bit further to like complete neutrality. This is going to ban loans or credits to countries at war. So that thing that the NYE Committee was saying was the factor that we got into World War I, now that's going to be banned. Materials will not be limited, though. So companies could still sell to warring nations at this point with this second Neutrality Act. So they could sell as long as they got paid up front. In the third Neutrality Act in 1937, we go even further. This is going to forbid the export of munitions to either side of the Spanish Civil War. So this is really specifically dealing with this conflict in Spain. Other goods will still be okay, so long as they're paid in cash, paid up front, and transported on their own ships. This is called a cash and carry provision, and we'll talk about that again in a moment. Finally, in 1937, the fourth Neutrality Act. This will authorize the president to determine what could or could not be sold beyond munitions. So this could become a more complete banning on selling other goods to countries at war. Also, this will make traveling on belligerent ships now unlawful. It will be against the law. It's not just, not encouraged. It's not just something that, people will have to do at their own risk. Now it is against American law to travel on belligerent ships. But how neutral was the United States by the time we get through 1937 with all these neutrality acts? Well, maybe not as neutral as many would like. For example, in the Sino-Japanese War of 1937, neither the Japanese nor the Chinese ever officially declared a war on each other. And so they weren't officially, by the definition of a war, belligerents. And so the United States, this did not invoke the Neutrality Acts in this conflict. As such, President Roosevelt will be sending arms shipments to China, who the United States supported during this conflict. Many in Congress were outraged at the president kind of going against the isolationist policies laid out in the Neutrality Acts. Roosevelt was also concerned about the spread of totalitarianism in Europe, but he does not have the congressional support or popular support at this moment. For example, when polling was done across the country, 70% of the American populace thought getting into World War I was a mistake, and 95% of Americans oppose any involvement in a future conflict. As the crisis worsens, some, though, begin to support some limited intervention. Roosevelt, of course, is strongly behind supporting the Western democratic states. After the Munich Pact, Roosevelt will begin to increase the defense budget, the money that the United States is putting towards building weapons of war, and we've got a lot of building. We've got a very small military in the 1930s. And as Adolf Hitler has taken Austria, has moved into Czechoslovakia, is absolutely looking like the belligerent that we know he is going to become, a fifth and final Neutrality Act is going to be passed in 1939. And this is going to begin to walk back some of those earlier prohibitions. This will lift the arms embargo, but it will say that all trade with any belligerent nations will be made under what are called cash and carry terms. So you need to pay up front, no loans. We're not going to get dragged into another war like we did in World War I. No loans, you got to pay in cash, and you have to carry it in your own ships. Once again, looking to the unrestricted submarine warfare of the First World War. So we're not going to get dragged into war. Bans on loans, however, will remain, but not for too long. We're going to fast forward to 1941, March of 1941. Now, we haven't talked yet about the evolution of the Second World War, but by March of 1941, this is a point in the war where it is looking like Adolf Hitler might win this war. Only the United Kingdom, only Great Britain is standing in Western Europe fighting against the Nazis. In 1941, in March of 1941, the United States Congress will pass and the president will sign what is known as the Lend-Lease Act. And this will now allow the United States to loan or lease military supplies to any nation said to be vital to the defense of the United States. At this early point, it's going to be Great Britain, it's going to be China in Asia. But in a couple months, Germany is going to invade the Soviet Union in June of 1941. And that's when the United States will open up Lend-Lease aid to Germany. We'll talk more about these developments in a next video. So we'll talk to you later.